When it comes to the role of the Chief White House correspondent, paint a picture for us about what that dynamic in that room looks like, just so
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can give you a couple examples, the sort of more routine and then the exceptional. I think they both answer your question. On a day-to-day basis, as the Chief White House correspondent for the Associated Press, within the AP, within that news organization, it's a title that means so much because you really are expected to run the White House operation and be the person that the president calls on first to ask the question, and to be so precise and thoughtful in your questions that whenever you ask one, it's not what's interesting to me, it's what's the question that's going to advance the story. And so in that sense, I also played a de facto role at times as a leader of the White House press corps, because the AP seat was front and center. And by tradition, a lot of the traditions have since left, since I was in the job. But at the time, the AP would get the first question. And so, what's Ben going to ask? What's the AP going to ask? And then the speed with which we would produce content was, AP news bulletin would come out first and shape the story. And so, it was the leadership of my team and of the White House coverage for the AP, but also the broader White House press corps. I certainly wasn't the leader. There were other leaders, great reporters, but I had that role often. And then in a more extreme example, I was on a trip to Afghanistan, and those trips are incredibly stressful for all the right reasons. Reporters on the trip in what we call the traveling press pool are selected by their news organizations to go, and you can't tell anybody. You're going in the cloak of darkness. They pull down the shades. You go in some secret entrances to, Andrews Air Force Base. You take off in the dead of night, and it's all very carefully choreographed so that nobody knows while we're in the air. The reason we don't want them to know is that we don't get shot down, right? It's really, really basic. And on one trip, the itinerary changed. And so the White House told us mid-flight, you are allowed to call your news desks while we're still on the plane and tell them that the details have changed, because we had stories ready to go, right? When they said, we can hit the button. And so when we called in, they said, well, the news is already out that the president's there. And it was this, I remember my heart almost stopping, because the first thing I thought was, we're going through all this trouble to keep it a secret, and I've been scooped, right, on the plane. And the second thing I thought of was like, that's really unsafe, because if they start shooting at the plane, I'm also on it. And so it was just loud and chaotic. Then I kept saying, and what had happened was one of the news organizations had seen coverage that the president, like one of the army bases, had put up a podiums. Anyway, it was the word had gotten out, but the story was wrong. It had him in the wrong city in Afghanistan. It had him on the ground. We were still in the air. So now you have this issue of, forget about the embargo being broken. There's inaccurate information out there, and we're screaming at hundreds of miles an hour into a war zone. It's pitch black in the back of the plane where the press are sequestered. I didn't have time to check with anybody. I just had to make a decision. And so on the other end, I'm talking to one of my colleagues, what do you want to do? And I said, just go with it. Just go with it. I had already given them the news that we're going to stay in Bagram. We're not going to Kabul. And we're not there yet, by the way, And so then the others in the press cabin heard me, and they're like, well, if AP is going with it, so we're going with it. And so I'll never forget how stressful that felt, because I had to circumvent all the kind of rules of engagement, because the rules have been broken on us.
Yeah.
Right. And I thought it was really dangerous to have that level of incorrect information out to the world. So I just made a unilateral decision. And when we landed, the press secretary at the time, Robert Gibbs, was making a direct line at me on the tarmac. And so we're coming at each other. And then there was a press person for the White House who saw what was happening, got right in between and said, it wasn't Feller's fault. Like, the leak was already out. He was correcting it. And so, but the president was pissed. And he took it out on Robert Gibbs. And so then on the flight back on Air Force One, Gibbs called me up and was yelling at me, right? And the Secret Service are nearby saying, like, what the hell's going on with these guys? And I'm like, Robert, why are you yelling at me? I was on the plane. I didn't leak it. And they're like, yeah, but somebody has to get yelled at, and you're the AP White House correspondent. So who do you expect me to be yelling at? Like, you're here. So for all of those reasons, it was both a practical position, but also a symbolic position in journalism. And you took the good with the bad.